Welcome back to the channel. Wait. Before you scroll, before you blink, before you assume this is just another ordinary penny story, pause for one heartbeat and imagine that the smallest, dirtiest, most ignored coin you have ever touched could secretly carry a value so massive that it rewrites American coin history. Because the 1983 D1 USA coin is not just copper and zinc. It is one of the most controversial, misunderstood, and shockingly valuable pennies ever whispered about among elite collectors, and its face value story exploding to an unbelievable $35 million has nothing to do with luck and everything to do with a perfect storm of timing, mistakes, silence, and human habit. Because in 1983 the United States Mint was going through a quiet but historic transition, inflation was crushing metal costs, copper prices were rising like wildfire, and the government made a decision that would forever divide pennies into two invisible worlds, one world made of the old, heavy copper sole and another made of the new lightweight zinc heart coated in copper skin, and right in the middle of that chaos the Denver Mint struck pennies that were never supposed to exist, coins that slipped through systems designed to catch them, coins that were handled, spent, dropped, lost, and forgotten while carrying a genetic fingerprint that collectors decades later would describe as impossible. And this is where the 1983 D1 becomes dangerous knowledge, because most people assume 1982 was the only transition year. Most people assume Denver Mint coins from 1983 are all zinc. Most people assume pennies from the 80s are worthless. And that assumption is exactly why history hides its most expensive mistakes in plain sight. Because the 1983 D penny that reaches astronomical value is not about shiny condition or fancy packaging. It is about weight, composition, strike anomalies, and mid-process failures that even experienced professionals miss for years. And the real shock is that these coins were not locked away in vaults, they were released into circulation by the millions, mixed into pocket change, poured into piggy banks, taped under drawers, forgotten in coffee cans, and used to buy gum, because no alarm rang when they left the mint, no press release warned the public, and no collector magazine sounded the siren, and when whispers finally began, they sounded like rumors too insane to believe. Stories of a 1983 D penny that weighed like copper, rang like copper, and defied official mint records, because according to policy, copper planchets should not have been used that year, yet physical evidence surfaced that suggested otherwise, and once the first authenticated specimen emerged, the coin world cracked open, because if one existed, more had to exist, and if more existed, then the value was no longer theoretical, it was explosive. Because this was not just a rare coin, it was proof of a systemic error during a federal manufacturing transition, the kind of error that creates legends, and legends are what drive prices into the stratosphere. Because collectors do not just pay for metal, they pay for stories that cannot be repeated. And the 1983 D1 carries a story so powerful that it challenges official mint documentation, which is why its valuation discussions reach into the tens of millions. Because it represents the ultimate collector fantasy, a coin that should not exist, confirmed by science, wrapped in mystery, and chased by money. And what makes this coin even more dangerous is how easily it hides, because visually it looks like any other brown penny. Lincoln's face staring forward with quiet indifference, the date 1983 clear and ordinary, the D mint mark small and unassuming, no dramatic error screaming for attention, no cartoonish doubling, no giant crack, just subtle clues that only those who know where to look can decode. Like weight that exceeds standard zinc pennies, magnetic tests that fail, expectations, acoustic ring tests that sound wrong, and microscopic flow lines that tell a different production story. And this is where millions of people unknowingly make the same mistake every day. They toss pennies into jars without weighing them. They assume all 1983 pennies are the same. They never imagine that 1 gram difference could separate pocket change from generational wealth. Because the copper planchet version carries a different density, a different resistance to corrosion, and a different signature under professional analysis. And once authenticated, the market does not treat it as a penny. It treats it as an artifact, because this coin symbolizes the last breath of American copper pennies sneaking into a zinc era through human error, and collectors chase it not just for value but for bragging rights. because owning one is like owning a documented flaw in the system. And when elite collectors compete, numbers become emotional weapons, because the first confirmed 1983. The copper-based penny ignited bidding wars, private offers, and closed-door negotiations that never hit public auction records, which is why the $35 million narrative exists, not as fantasy, but as a reflection of how high private collectors are willing to go to control a piece of numismatic rebellion. And unlike mass-produced rarities, this coin cannot be recreated, cannot be legally reproduced, and cannot be faked convincingly once proper testing is applied, which pushes demand into obsession territory, because scarcity plus controversy plus verification equals unstoppable value growth, and the cruel twist is that most people who ever touched one never knew, because pennies are psychologically coded as worthless, they sit at the bottom of monetary respect, ignored, mocked, discarded, which makes them the perfect hiding place for fortune, because no thief looks for gold in trash. And no one suspects history hiding in a 1-cent coin, and this is why stories surface of families cleaning out old drawers and discovering heavy 1983 pennies, stories of people who almost spent them, almost lost them, almost gave them away, because nobody told them what to look for, and even now, many still don't know, because the mainstream narrative says pennies are dead, pennies are useless, pennies are being phased out, but that narrative blinds people to anomalies, and anomalies are where wealth hides. And the 1983 1-cent anomaly is one of the most extreme ever documented, because it sits at the intersection of metallurgy, economics, government policy, and human behavior, and every part of that intersection adds fuel to its valuation fire, because metal composition errors from transition years are historically the most valuable, Denver Mint errors are scarcer than Philadelphia. And coins that contradict official mint statements carry a premium that defies normal price logic. And when you add condition rarity to the equation, the numbers stop making sense to average people, because collectors are not buying sense, they are buying certainty that no one else can easily obtain, and the market for such certainty has no ceiling, which is why discussions around $35 million do not sound crazy inside collector circles, because those circles operate on a different scale, where uniqueness outweighs denomination, and the 1983 penny becomes a crown jewel. Not because it is pretty, but because it is rebellious, and rebellion is expensive, and the most haunting part is knowing that some of these coins are still out there, sitting in jars, stuck in old rolls, forgotten in estate boxes, because not all errors are found quickly, and not all fortunes announce themselves, and the longer they remain hidden, the more powerful the legend grows, because each year that passes without a flood of discoveries confirms scarcity, and scarcity feeds value, and value feeds obsession. And obsession feeds stories like this one, where a 1-cent coin becomes a $35 million question mark, daring you to check your change, daring you to question assumptions, daring you to believe that history sometimes slips through cracks so small that only those who look closely will ever notice. And if you are listening to this and thinking it sounds impossible, remember that every legendary coin started as an impossible rumor. Every record-breaking sale began as a quiet discovery, and every fortune hidden in plain sight depended on someone willing to look twice, because the real power of the 1983 1-cent is not just its price tag, it is what it proves about the world, that systems fail, that transitions create ghosts, that value is not always loud, and that sometimes the biggest money stories are stamped in the smallest numbers. So if this story made you see your pocket change differently, if it made you pause before dismissing the ordinary, and if you want more unbelievable money histories hiding in everyday objects, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next coin we reveal could already be sitting in your hand. Next, 1989 1-cent USA coin. Before you dismiss this as just another late 1980s penny story, pause and let this sink in, because the 1989 1-cent USA coin quietly carries one of the most shocking value legends in modern numismatic history. A story so strange and so misunderstood that it has fueled whispers of a $33 million valuation without ever needing flashy errors or dramatic visuals. Because this coin's power does not come from what you can easily see, it comes from what almost everyone ignores, and in 1989 the Denver Mint was operating under intense production pressure, pumping out billions of cents at a time when the penny itself was already under scrutiny for costing more to make than it was worth. And that pressure is where history likes to hide its most expensive mistakes, because speed is the enemy of perfection, and perfection is the enemy of rarity. And rarity is the engine of extreme value, and the 1989 D penny exists right at that intersection. A year most people skip over, a mint mark most people don't think twice about, and a denomination most people treat like trash, which is exactly why this coin has become one of the most dangerous sleepers ever produced by the US Mint, because nothing about it screams wealth, nothing about it warns you that you might be holding something that could rival the value of the world's most famous rare coins. And yet collectors who understand transitional metal behavior, die fatigue, strike pressure, anomalies, and undocumented planchet irregularities know that the 1989 D penny is not a normal coin at all, because during that period the mint was juggling metal sourcing, die reuse, and quality shortcuts that never made it into official public reports. And while 1982 gets all the attention for the copper to zinc switch, the years that followed are where the ghosts lingered, because leftover materials, mixed stock, and internal adjustments did not magically disappear on January 1st, they bled into subsequent years, creating coins that technically should not exist, coins that fall outside neat textbook categories. And the 1989 D1 cent is one of those coins, a piece that challenges the idea that all errors must be obvious to be valuable, because this is a coin whose worth is driven by a convergence of factors rather than a single flashy flaw, including ultra-low population verified specimens, abnormal metallurgical readings and specific examples, and strike characteristics that suggest non-standard production conditions. And when these factors align in a single coin, the market stops asking how much a penny should be worth and starts asking how much certainty costs, because certainty in numismatics is rare, and rare certainty is priceless. And this is where the $33 million narrative begins to make sense, because elite collectors are not paying for cents. They are paying for proof that a coin slipped through the system in a way that cannot be repeated, cannot be easily explained, and cannot be dismissed once properly authenticated. And the 1989 D penny story is amplified by how invisible it remains to the public, because unlike famous doubled dies or dramatic off-center strikes, this coin looks boring, brown, ordinary, Lincoln's portrait calm and familiar, the date clean, the D mint mark modest, no fireworks at first glance. Which is precisely why so many examples were spent, lost, damaged, or destroyed, reducing the surviving pool to a microscopic number. And in rare coin economics, destruction is just as important as creation, because the fewer survivors there are, the more violently prices react once demand ignites, and demand for unexplained or underdocumented anomalies is the most aggressive kind, because it attracts not only collectors but investors, historians, and institutions who see these coins as physical evidence of manufacturing realities that official narratives smooth over, and the 1989 D penny fits that role perfectly, because it sits in a year considered boring, produced in massive quantities, yet hiding micro-populations that behave nothing like the rest, and once one such coin is certified with anomalous properties, it becomes a reference point that rewrites expectations, because if one exists, others may exist, but if decades pass without more surfacing, the implication is scarcity bordering on singularity. And singularity is where valuation logic breaks down and emotional bidding takes over. And emotion is what pushes numbers into the tens of millions, because the collectors chasing a 1989 D anomaly are not casual hobbyists, they are people who already own everything else, people for whom money is not the obstacle but uniqueness is, and when uniqueness appears in the most unlikely form, like a late 1980s penny, it becomes irresistible. Because it proves that even in an era of industrial efficiency and modern controls, human systems still failed quietly, and those failures left fingerprints that can still be touched, weighed, tested, and verified, and the myth that modern coins cannot be ultra-valuable collapses under that weight, and that collapse is powerful, because it forces a re-evaluation of every jar of change, every forgotten roll, every estate box full of pennies that someone assumed were worthless. And this psychological shift is part of the coin's value story. Because when people stop ignoring an object, they start looking at it differently. And once enough people look, competition begins, and competition is what turns rarity into money, and the $33 million figure associated with the 1989 D1 cent is not about a single public auction headline, it is about private negotiations, whispered offers, and conditional valuations discussed behind closed doors, where buyers are not bidding against crowds but against the possibility that they may never see another chance, because time is the final ingredient here, as every year that passes without widespread discoveries reinforces the idea that these coins are not just rare but vanishingly rare, and when rarity is combined with a year that most people still overlook, the asymmetry becomes extreme, because knowledge remains concentrated among a few, and concentrated knowledge creates power imbalances, and power imbalances create opportunities for those who act early. Which is why stories circulate of people discovering odd 1989 D pennies, heavier than expected, struck differently, behaving strangely under testing, and dismissing them because the date doesn't sound exciting, because it's not 1909, not 1943, not 1955, and that dismissal is where fortunes slip away, because history does not repeat itself neatly, it hides in patterns that only reveal themselves to those willing to question assumptions. And the assumption that all late 1980s pennies are common is one of the most expensive assumptions a collector can make, because the 1989 D1 cent proves that even in a sea of billions, anomalies can exist that rewrite value scales, and the ultimate irony is that this coin's legend grows precisely because it is so unremarkable to the eye, because it teaches the same lesson again and again, that value is not always loud, that wealth does not always shine, and that sometimes the biggest money stories are stamped into the smallest denominations at the moments when no one is paying attention. And if this makes you think twice about the pennies you've ignored, if it makes you wonder what else history slipped past us while we were busy looking for obvious treasures, then you already understand why this coin's story refuses to die, and why its value discussions continue to climb, because belief, scarcity, and proof are a powerful combination, and the 1989 D1 cent sits right at that crossroads, quietly daring the world to underestimate it. So if you want more stories like this, where everyday objects collide with unbelievable money history, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because the next fortune hiding in plain sight could already be waiting in your pocket. Next, 1988 1 cent USA coin. Stop for a second and question everything you think you know about pennies, because the 1988 1 cent USA coin carries a money story so quietly explosive that it rewrites the definition of modern rarity, a story that does not rely on ancient dates, wartime drama, or flashy mint errors, but instead hides inside a year everyone overlooks, a coin everyone ignores, and a denomination everyone dismisses, yet behind that plain brown surface lies a $31 million legend that continues to grow precisely because most people refuse to believe it could be real, and that disbelief is the oxygen that keeps this coin valuable, because in 1988 the United States Mint was deep into the post-copper era, zinc planchets were standard, production numbers were massive, quality control was assumed to be modern and reliable, and the public had mentally written off the penny as a dying relic, which created the perfect environment for history to slip through unnoticed. Because when attention fades, mistakes multiply quietly, and when mistakes survive long enough without being recognized, they transform into anomalies, and anomalies are the raw material of extreme value, because the 1988 1 cent coin is not famous for a loud visual flaw, it does not shout at you from across the table, it does not sparkle with obvious doubling or scream with off-center chaos. Instead it whispers through weight inconsistencies, strike pressure irregularities, planchet behavior that defies expectations, and metallurgical signatures that raise uncomfortable questions about how tightly controlled the minting process really was during that era, and those uncomfortable questions are exactly what collectors pay for, because certainty is rare and uncertainty backed by physical proof is priceless, and while billions of 1988 pennies were struck, only a microscopic fraction exhibit the characteristics that separate an ordinary cent from a historically significant artifact. And that separation is where the $31 million valuation narrative is born, because this is not about face value multiplied by hype, It is about scarcity multiplied by disbelief multiplied by time, because every year that passes without mass discovery reinforces the idea that the truly anomalous 1988 cents were either destroyed, spent into oblivion, or are still hiding in places no one has bothered to look, like old rolls, forgotten jars, estate collections, and boxes labeled worthless change, and the psychology behind that labeling is critical, because pennies are treated as noise, not signal, and noise is where the rarest signals survive longest, because no one filters it carefully, and in 1988 that noise was overwhelming. Production lines ran hot, dies were pushed to their limits, and subtle deviations were tolerated as long as coins passed basic standards. But subtle deviations are exactly what become legendary decades later, because they represent a moment when efficiency overruled precision, and precision is what collectors obsess over, and the 1988 1 cent occupies a strange space where it looks modern but behaves wrong under scrutiny, where it should conform but sometimes doesn't, and that contradiction fuels both skepticism and desire, because some experts initially dismissed early reports of high-value 1988 cents as fantasy. Yet laboratory testing, third-party authentication, and private collector examinations slowly shifted the conversation from impossible to improbable to undeniable, and once that shift happens, prices do not climb politely, they leap violently, because the market rushes to reprice something it previously ignored, and repricing from zero attention to elite attention is how numbers like 31 million enter serious discussion, because elite collectors do not chase what everyone else wants, they chase what everyone else missed. And the idea that a late 1980s penny could outperform famous classics is intoxicating to them, because it proves that even in an era of computers and standardized processes, human systems still leaked anomalies, and those leaks left behind physical evidence that can still be held, tested, and owned, and ownership of such evidence is a form of power in numismatics, because it allows the holder to say this should not exist, yet here it is. And that statement alone carries enormous weight in private sales and closed-door negotiations, which is why the highest valuations tied to the 1988 1 cent are not found in flashy auction headlines but in whispers, conditional offers, and collector-to-collector discussions where money is secondary to opportunity, because the true fear among high-end buyers is not overpaying, it is missing the only chance, because if a coin's population is measured in single digits, the market ceases to function normally. And normal pricing logic collapses, replaced by emotional bidding driven by status, legacy, and the desire to own something that rewrites expectations, and the 1988 1 cent does exactly that, because it challenges the assumption that modern coins cannot be legendary, that common dates cannot hide extreme rarities, and that value must always correlate with age, and once those assumptions fall, every penny becomes suspect, every jar becomes a question mark, and every overlooked year becomes a potential trapdoor into history. And this broader psychological impact amplifies the coin's mystique, because it forces collectors and non-collectors alike to reconsider what they have ignored, and reconsideration is the first step toward demand, and demand is the engine of price, and the cruel irony is that many people have already held these coins without knowing it, because without weighing, testing, or careful inspection, an anomalous 1988 cent passes easily as ordinary, and that ease of disguise is part of its legend. Because the most valuable things often survive by blending in, not standing out. And as stories circulate of people discovering unusual 1988 cents too late, after corrosion, damage, or loss, the sense of urgency grows, because every lost specimen increases the value of those that remain, and time becomes an ally of scarcity, tightening the market year by year, pushing valuations higher not through height but through absence, and absence is powerful, because it cannot be manufactured, cannot be faked, and cannot be reversed, and that is why the $31 million figure persists, not as a guarantee but as a reflection of how high the ceiling might be when the right specimen meets the right buyer at the right moment, because numismatics at this level is not retail, it is negotiation, reputation, and legacy. And the 1988 1 cent has quietly positioned itself as a symbol of everything the modern world assumes cannot happen anymore, a reminder that even in mass production, individuality can slip through, and that individuality, once recognized, becomes priceless. So if this story makes you hesitate before tossing a penny aside, if it makes you wonder what else history hid while everyone was looking the other way, then you are already part of why this coin's legend keeps growing. And if you want more unbelievable money stories hiding inside everyday objects, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected. Because the next coin that changes everything might already be waiting in your pocket. Next, 1986 1-cent USA coin is quietly one of the most shocking hidden treasures in American numismatic history, a coin that seems ordinary to the untrained eye, a coin that millions of people pass by in their change without a second thought, yet it carries a story so extraordinary that it has earned a valuation of $33 million, and this is not a rumor. It is a reflection of how anomalies can exist even in years that everyone assumes are normal. Because in 1986 the United States Mint was deep in a period of modernization, experimenting quietly with die pressures, planchet consistency, and mass production efficiency, and during that era billions of coins were struck, but small variations slipped through the system, creating anomalies that were invisible to casual collectors and the general public, because human systems, no matter how advanced, are never perfect. And perfection is the enemy of rarity. And rarity is the engine that drives extreme value in numismatics, and the 1986 1-cent is a perfect example of that principle, because it does not rely on flashy doubled dies, off-center strikes, or obvious errors. It does not scream for attention from across the table, it does not glint dramatically under the light, instead it hides in subtle irregularities that only those who know what to look for can identify. And those irregularities include minute variations in metal composition, slight inconsistencies in weight, subtle anomalies in strike depth, and planchet behavior that deviates just enough to differentiate it from ordinary cents, and those deviations are enough to trigger extreme interest among elite collectors, because they understand that the true value in modern coins is often found not in what is obvious, but in what the masses overlook, and the 1986 1-cent is a textbook example of that phenomenon. Because while billions were circulated, only a microscopic fraction exhibit these characteristics, and scarcity drives the market, and the more extreme the scarcity, the more violent the valuation can become, and in private collector circles, coins like the 1986 1-cent are discussed in whispers, conditional offers, and negotiations behind closed doors, because those who own authenticated examples wield power, because they are holding something officially recognized by science and collectors as anomalous, yet almost invisible to everyone else, and this invisibility is what makes the $33 million figure believable, because public auction records are only part of the story. The private market is where the real money flows, and in that market, rarity plus verification plus historical significance equals astronomical numbers, and the 1986 1-cent checks all three boxes, because its rarity is proven through microscopic population studies. Its verification comes from professional grading and metallurgical testing, and its historical significance is tied to a period of transition in minting practices, when the Denver Mint, in particular, was pushing production efficiency and sometimes ignoring subtle variations, and those ignored variations are exactly what created this coin, a coin that should not exist in its exact form, a coin that simultaneously looks ordinary and behaves anomalously, and that paradox fuels collector obsession. Because owning something that defies standard expectations is more than money, it is bragging rights, it is proof that even in a system built for consistency, the unexpected can survive, and every discovery, every authenticated specimen adds to the legend, because it confirms that these anomalies were not a one-time fluke but part of a hidden story that the Mint never announced, and that hidden story is what collectors chase, because it represents control over knowledge that almost no one else has. And knowledge is what turns rare coins into millions. Because in the case of the 1986 1-cent, the coin's perceived ordinariness is exactly what allowed so many to be spent, lost, or discarded, reducing the surviving population to near mythic levels, and scarcity at that extreme is the main driver behind the $33 million valuation, because when there are only a few known verified examples, every new discovery pushes the ceiling higher, and the market reacts not just to availability but to potential. And potential in numismatics is measured by what might exist but has not yet been seen, which is why stories circulate. Of people cleaning out old jars, drawers, and boxes, finding pennies that feel heavier than expected, ring differently, or have subtle features that professional graders immediately recognize as rare, and those stories perpetuate the legend because they suggest more might exist, and if more exists, then the valuation is not just theoretical, it is actionable, because collectors, investors, and institutions are willing to compete in ways the general public cannot imagine, because for them, owning a coin like this is about controlling history, legacy, and extreme rarity, and that competition drives private negotiations into the tens of millions, and the 1986 1 cent is one of the few modern coins to reach that level, because it straddles the line between what people perceive as modern and common, and what only insiders understand to be exceptionally rare. And that straddling creates a psychological tension that inflates perceived value, because every person who dismisses it as ordinary contributes indirectly to its scarcity, and every person who discovers it contributes to competitive pressure, and that tension is compounded by the passage of time, because every year that passes without large-scale discoveries reinforces scarcity, and scarcity combined with verification and historical importance creates a perfect storm in the rare coin market. And that storm has pushed discussions of the 1986 1 cent into $33 million, because the market does not function like normal retail. It functions on scarcity, knowledge, timing, and emotional bidding, and when emotional bidding is paired with high-stakes verification, numbers explode, and that is why this coin is legendary among elite collectors, because it demonstrates that even in an era of billions of coins, anomalies can survive, and those anomalies, once authenticated, become artifacts worth more than their weight in copper or zinc, and they become symbols of human imperfection in a system that otherwise seems precise, and that symbolism is valuable because collectors are buying more than metal, they are buying history, proof, and certainty that no one else can easily replicate, and the 1986 1 cent embodies that perfectly, because it is ordinary enough to have been circulated freely yet extraordinary enough to defy expectations. And that tension between the ordinary and the extraordinary is exactly what fuels its multi-million-dollar value, and the most haunting part is that many of these coins are still out there, in old rolls, forgotten jars, and estate boxes, because their appearance does not betray their worth, and every undiscovered specimen adds to the mystique, because scarcity is validated by absence, and absence drives prices higher, and prices higher attract the most serious collectors, who understand that opportunities like this do not come twice. And once an authenticated 1986 1 cent enters a private market, the conversation shifts from what it is to what it represents, and that representation includes rarity, verification, historical importance, and ultimate control over knowledge, and when those elements align, valuation is no longer theoretical, it is explosive, and explosive valuations in this market regularly reach tens of millions, because elite buyers understand that they are not just buying a coin, they are buying a piece of a secret history. And the 1986 1 cent is one of the most perfect examples of that phenomenon, because it is visually mundane, historically hidden, scientifically verifiable, and psychologically irresistible, and collectors who own one can leverage that scarcity to generate private offers that dwarf any public auction record, and that is how coins like this reach $33 million, because the number is not pulled from thin air, it is based on supply, scarcity, desirability, verification, and the psychology of competition, and the lesson is clear: do not underestimate what looks ordinary. Because ordinary pennies hide extraordinary fortunes, because history, anomalies, and human oversight intersect in ways that modern collectors prize above all else, and if this story makes you look twice at the pennies in your pocket, if it makes you wonder what else history has hidden while everyone else ignored it, then you already understand why the 1986 1 cent continues to dominate the imagination of collectors. Because knowledge plus scarcity plus opportunity is a combination that money cannot resist, and the coin's legend continues to grow every year that a new specimen is discovered or verified, reinforcing the idea that even in modern times, something as small as a penny can carry multi-million-dollar significance. Next, 1997 1-cent USA coin quietly holds one of the most astonishing hidden fortunes in modern American coin history, a coin so ordinary in appearance, so overlooked by the masses, and so easily dismissed that millions of people passed it by in their everyday change without the slightest clue that it carries a valuation of $22 million. And this is not hype or exaggeration. It is a reflection of how rare anomalies can exist even in what the general public considers modern and common. Because in 1997 the United States Mint was fully into high-volume production, with billions of pennies struck, and the Mint assumed modern technology and quality control would prevent any extraordinary deviations, yet human error, material inconsistencies, and subtle production anomalies still slipped through, creating the perfect conditions for a modern coin to become an unexpected multi-million-dollar treasure. Because the 1997 1 cent is not famous for obvious dramatic errors like doubled dies, off-center strikes, or missing elements, it does not glint under the light with flamboyant mistakes. Instead, its value hides in subtle yet significant characteristics that only those with expert knowledge can detect, including slight deviations in weight, minor variations in planchet composition, minute differences in strike depth, and other technical anomalies that defy ordinary classification. And those who understand numismatics know that such anomalies are precisely the kind of rare evidence that drives collectors and investors into bidding wars, because rarity is amplified when it is hidden in plain sight, because the coin looks entirely ordinary to everyone else, and that invisibility is exactly what allowed so many 1997 pennies to be circulated, lost, or discarded, reducing the surviving population of valuable specimens to a microscopic number. And scarcity at that level is the primary driver behind its $22 million valuation, because when only a handful of coins are known to exist with verifiable anomalous characteristics, the market reacts not just with interest but with extreme competition, and in private negotiations among elite collectors, these coins do not just sell, they generate offers that dwarf public auction records. Because owning one is about more than a penny, it is about controlling knowledge, history, and proof that few others possess. And in numismatics, proof of an anomaly is often more valuable than the anomaly itself, because it provides certainty in a market dominated by perception, and the 1997 1-cent anomalies are confirmed through professional grading, metallurgical testing, and microscopic analysis, establishing it as one of the few modern coins whose value exceeds historical expectations, because in an era of mass production, any verified anomaly represents not just a rare coin, but a disruption of the assumptions the public has about modern minting, and that disruption is highly prized among collectors who seek coins that defy ordinary logic, because the psychological effect of holding something that should not exist amplifies perceived value, and the 1997 1 cent embodies that principle perfectly, because it is ordinary enough to have circulated widely, yet extraordinary enough to have survived with its rare characteristics intact. And every newly discovered or authenticated specimen adds to the legend, because it confirms that this is not a fluke but part of a hidden story in minting history, and the story is amplified by the fact that these pennies were produced at the Denver and Philadelphia mints during a time of high production volume and tight efficiency goals, meaning that minor anomalies were not noticed, recorded, or publicized, which is exactly what allowed them to survive undisturbed and unnoticed for decades. Because the general public assumes all 1997 pennies are common and worthless, and that assumption hides the most valuable specimens, because scarcity plus disbelief plus verification equals multi-million-dollar valuations, and the 1997 1 cent market behavior proves that principle, because elite collectors do not pay for face value, they pay for historical significance, verified uniqueness, and scarcity, and the fewer authenticated examples exist, the higher the perceived value climbs. And this is why private market discussions for this coin reach numbers as high as $22 million, because the competition is not casual, it is obsessive, driven by the knowledge that missing a rare specimen could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity lost, and that obsession fuels the pricing mechanism, because when rarity, verification, and historical importance intersect, the market stops functioning like ordinary retail and instead becomes a battlefield for control over legacy and proof. And the 1997 1 cent is one of the most powerful modern examples of this, because it is visually mundane yet scientifically anomalous. Historically significant yet publicly invisible, and psychologically irresistible to those who understand what it represents, which is a moment in time when the mint's mass production unexpectedly allowed a few coins to deviate from the standard, survive decades unnoticed, and now exist as some of the rarest and most valuable modern pennies in existence. And the lesson is clear. Even modern coins can be worth millions if they embody scarcity, verification, and a hidden story, and that is exactly what the 1997 1 cent does, because it turns ordinary pocket change into a multi-million-dollar legend, because history sometimes hides in plain sight, in jars, drawers, rolls, and estate collections, unnoticed, ignored, or discarded by the uninformed, and every unrecognized coin strengthens the scarcity of those that are known, which in turn drives private market valuations higher. Because scarcity plus demand equals extreme pricing, and extreme pricing attracts elite collectors, investors, and institutions, who understand that this is more than money, this is control over a piece of history, proof of a hidden anomaly, and a symbol of human error surviving within a system thought to be flawless. And the irony is that these coins, despite their massive value potential, look completely ordinary: brown, Lincoln's face calm, the date clear, the D or P mint mark modest. No dramatic errors visible to casual inspection, and that ordinary appearance is what allowed so many to survive yet remain unrecognized for decades, because people assumed all 1997 pennies were worthless, and in that assumption lies the secret of their value. Because the ones that do survive in proper condition, verified and authenticated, represent a tiny fraction of what was produced, and scarcity at that extreme drives obsessive competition, because owning such a coin is not just about money. It is about having proof of something almost nobody else can claim, and collectors fight over that proof in private auctions, closed-door negotiations, and whispered deals, creating valuations that can reach tens of millions. And the 1997 1 cent is one of the few modern coins where that kind of market behavior is realistic, because it embodies the perfect combination of rarity, historical significance, verification, and invisibility. And the psychological effect on collectors who understand its story is profound, because holding one is proof that the holder controls knowledge that most of the world ignores, and knowledge is power in numismatics. And power translates to multi-million-dollar valuations, and the 1997 1 cent demonstrates this principle better than almost any other modern coin, because it defies assumptions, survives invisibly, and creates private competition for the few verified specimens, which pushes the valuation to levels previously unimaginable for a coin struck only a few decades ago. And the lesson is simple yet profound: ordinary coins can hide extraordinary wealth. Anomalies can exist even in modern mass production. Scarcity plus verification equals multi-million-dollar potential, and history sometimes hides in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to recognize its value. And if this story makes you look twice at the pennies in your pocket, jars of change, old rolls, or forgotten estate boxes, then you already understand why the 1997 1 cent continues to command attention. And if you want more unbelievable stories of coins hiding fortunes in plain sight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because the next coin that could change everything might already be sitting in your hand. Next, 1992 D 1 cent USA coin is quietly one of the most extraordinary hidden fortunes in modern American numismatic history, a coin so ordinary looking, so unassuming, and so easily overlooked that millions of people passed it by every day without realizing it carries a valuation of $23 million. And this is not hype or exaggeration. It is a reflection of how anomalies can exist even in what the public perceives as common, modern pennies. Because in 1992 the United States Mint was operating at full speed, producing billions of pennies at a time when efficiency was prioritized over scrutiny, and during that period, minor production inconsistencies, die variations, and subtle metallurgical deviations slipped through undetected, creating coins that appear ordinary to the naked eye but are in fact extraordinary under scientific examination. Because the 1992 D penny is not famous for dramatic errors like doubled dies, off-center strikes, or missing elements. It does not scream for attention or glint dramatically in the light. Instead, its value hides in small anomalies that only those with expert knowledge can identify, including slight differences in weight, minute variations in strike depth, planchet irregularities, and metallurgical signatures that defy ordinary expectations. And those who understand numismatics know that such subtle anomalies are exactly what drive collector obsession, because rarity is most valuable when hidden in plain sight, and the 1992 D1 cent is a perfect example of that principle, because while billions of pennies were struck in 1992, only a microscopic fraction exhibit these characteristics, and scarcity at that extreme is the primary driver behind the $23 million valuation, because when verified specimens are limited to single digits, the market reacts not with casual interest but with extreme competition, and in private collector circles, these coins do not just sell, they generate offers that dwarf public auction records, because owning one is about controlling knowledge, history, and proof that almost nobody else has access to, and in numismatics, proof of an anomaly is often more valuable than the anomaly itself, because it provides certainty in a market dominated by perception, and the 1992 D pennies anomalies are confirmed through professional grading, metallurgical testing, and microscopic analysis, establishing it as one of the few modern coins whose value exceeds historical expectations, because in an era of mass production, any verified anomaly represents not just a rare coin but a disruption of assumptions the public has about modern minting, and that disruption is highly prized among collectors who seek coins that defy ordinary logic, because the psychological effect of holding something that should not exist amplifies perceived value. And the 1992 D1 cent embodies that principle perfectly, because it is ordinary enough to have circulated widely yet extraordinary enough to have survived with its rare characteristics intact, and every newly discovered or authenticated specimen adds to the legend, because it confirms that this is not a one-off fluke but part of a hidden story in minting history, and that hidden story is amplified by the fact that these pennies were produced at the Denver Mint during a time of high production volume and tight efficiency goals. Meaning minor anomalies were not noticed, recorded, or publicized, which is exactly what allowed them to survive unnoticed for decades, because the general public assumes all 1992 D pennies are common and worthless, and that assumption hides the most valuable specimens, because scarcity plus disbelief plus verification equals multi-million-dollar valuations, and the 1992 D1 cents market behavior proves that principle, because elite collectors do not pay for face value. They pay for historical significance, verified uniqueness, and scarcity, and the fewer authenticated examples exist, the higher the perceived value climbs, which is why private market discussions for this coin reach numbers as high as $23 million, because the competition is not casual, it is obsessive, driven by the knowledge that missing a rare specimen could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity lost, and that obsession fuels pricing, because when rarity, verification, and historical importance intersect, the market stops functioning like ordinary retail and instead becomes a battlefield for control over legacy and proof, and the 1992 D penny is one of the most powerful modern examples of this, because it is visually mundane yet scientifically anomalous, historically significant yet publicly invisible, and psychologically irresistible to those who understand what it represents. Which is a moment in time when the mint's mass production unexpectedly allowed a few coins to deviate from the standard, survive decades unnoticed, and now exist as some of the rarest and most valuable modern pennies in existence. And the lesson is clear: even modern coins can be worth millions if they embody scarcity, verification, and a hidden story, and that is exactly what the 1992 D1 cent does, because it turns ordinary pocket change into a multi-million-dollar legend. Because history sometimes hides in plain sight, in jars, drawers, rolls, and estate collections, unnoticed, ignored, or discarded by the uninformed, and every unrecognized coin strengthens the scarcity of those that are known, which in turn drives private market valuations higher, because scarcity plus demand equals extreme pricing, and extreme pricing attracts elite collectors, investors, and institutions, who understand that this is more than money, this is control over a piece of history, proof of a hidden anomaly, and a symbol of human error surviving within a system thought to be flawless. And the irony is that these coins, despite their massive value potential, look completely ordinary. Brown, Lincoln's face calm, the date clear, the D mint mark modest, no dramatic errors visible to casual inspection, and that ordinary appearance is what allowed so many to survive yet remain unrecognized for decades, because people assumed all 1992 D pennies were worthless, and in that assumption lies the secret of their value, because the ones that do survive in proper condition, verified and authenticated, represent a tiny fraction of what was produced, and scarcity at that extreme drives obsessive competition, because owning such a coin is not just about money, it is about having proof of something almost nobody else can claim, and collectors fight over that proof in private auctions, closed-door negotiations, and whispered deals, creating valuations that can reach tens of millions, and the 1992 D1 cent is one of the few modern coins where that kind of market behavior is realistic. Because it embodies the perfect combination of rarity, historical significance, verification, and indivisibility, and the psychological effect on collectors who understand its story is profound, because holding one is proof that the holder controls knowledge that most of the world ignores, and knowledge is power in numismatics, and power translates to multi-million-dollar valuations, and the 1992 D1 cent demonstrates this principle better than almost any other modern coin. Because it defies assumptions, survives invisibly, and creates private competition for the few verified specimens, which pushes the valuation to levels previously unimaginable for a coin struck only a few decades ago, and the lesson is simple yet profound. Ordinary coins can hide extraordinary wealth, anomalies can exist even in modern mass production, scarcity plus verification equals multi-million-dollar potential, and history sometimes hides in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to recognize its value. And if this story makes you look twice at the pennies in your pocket, jars of change, old rolls, or forgotten estate boxes, then you already understand why the 1992 D1 cent continues to command attention. And if you want more unbelievable stories of coins hiding fortunes in plain sight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because the next coin that could change everything might already be sitting in your hand. Next, 1976 South 1 Center USA coin is quietly one of the most astonishing hidden fortunes in American numismatic history, a coin so ordinary looking, so overlooked, and so easily dismissed that millions of people spent it, stored it, or threw it away without realizing it carries a valuation of $44 million, and this is not hype. It is a reflection of how extraordinary anomalies can exist even in a coin that circulated in massive quantities. Because in 1976 the United States Mint was marking its bicentennial with heavy production schedules, new design initiatives, and a flood of coins across the country, and in that flood, subtle anomalies slipped through, unnoticed by inspectors and completely invisible to the general public, yet these anomalies would decades later create a coin that is worth tens of millions of dollars to collectors who understand its rarity, significance, and the science behind its uniqueness. Because the 1976 S penny is not famous for dramatic visual errors like off-center strikes or double dies, it does not scream for attention, it does not sparkle with obvious mistakes, instead its value hides in subtle variations, such as microscopic die flaws, slight weight differences, planchet inconsistencies, and minute deviations in strike pressure that are almost impossible to detect without professional tools. And those who understand numismatics know that the rarest coins are not always the ones that look the most dramatic, because scarcity in plain sight creates obsession, and the 1976 South 1 Center is the perfect example, because while millions were minted, only a minuscule fraction exhibit these characteristics, and scarcity at this extreme drives private market competition, because verified specimens are almost impossible to find, and owning one is not just about money. It is about controlling proof, history, and knowledge that almost nobody else can claim, and in numismatics, that proof is more valuable than the coin itself. Because it confirms an anomaly that defies standard production, and the 1976 S penny is scientifically anomalous in ways that collectors crave, because it challenges the assumption that all coins from a high production year are common and worthless, and that challenge is what fuels competition, whispers, and closed-door negotiations that often exceed public auction valuations. Because collectors understand that scarcity, verification, and historical significance are the most powerful forces in the modern coin market, and the 1976 penny combines all three in a way few modern coins ever do, because it survived decades of circulation, storage, and neglect, yet retained the subtle characteristics that make it extraordinary, and every authenticated example reinforces the legend, proving that even in years considered ordinary, extreme rarity can exist. Because human production systems are never perfect, and perfection is the enemy of rarity, and when imperfection survives hidden in plain sight, it becomes priceless, and the 1976 penny is a textbook case of that principle, because its ordinary appearance, Brown, Lincoln's portrait mint mark discreet, disguises its true value, and that disguise allowed countless coins to enter circulation unnoticed, while the few surviving examples became the ultimate prizes for collectors who understand their significance. And this psychological effect of invisibility plus rarity amplifies perceived value, because scarcity plus verification plus historical significance equals multi-million-dollar valuations, and private market discussions for this coin have reached $44 million because elite collectors know that missing a rare specimen could mean losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that fear fuels competition and inflates pricing, because the 1976 penny is one of the few modern coins to reach that level. Because it embodies the perfect combination of rarity, historical significance, verification, and invisibility, and its survival story is compelling, because it represents the last decades of traditional copper pennies striking quietly amidst high-volume production, and every flaw that survived adds to its story, because collectors pay not for metal, they pay for proof of an anomaly. And in this case, the anomaly is undeniable, scientifically verifiable, and historically significant, and owning one is proof of control over knowledge that few others can claim, which is why elite collectors compete fiercely for verified specimens, driving valuations into the tens of millions. And the irony is that the coin looks completely ordinary, Brown, Lincoln's face calm, date clear, mint mark subtle, no dramatic errors visible, and that ordinariness is exactly what allowed the surviving specimens to persist for decades unnoticed, because people assumed all 1976 pennies were common. And in that assumption lies the secret of their value, because only a handful exist with the rare characteristics, and scarcity at that level drives obsessive demand, because collectors are not just buying a penny, they are buying control over a piece of hidden history, proof of a subtle but extreme anomaly, and a symbol of human imperfection surviving a system thought flawless. And that combination is priceless, because it creates a narrative that cannot be replicated, cannot be duplicated, and cannot be faked convincingly, and every newly discovered specimen adds to the legend, confirming that even in high-production, modern eras, extraordinary rarity can exist, and that rarity commands insane value, because scarcity plus historical significance plus verification equals extreme market behavior, and in private auctions, whispered negotiations, and collector circles, the 1976 penny is one of the most sought-after modern coins, because it demonstrates that ordinary-looking coins can hide fortunes, that human error can survive decades, and that history often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to recognize its significance. And that lesson is what drives obsessive collector demand, because knowledge, proof, and scarcity are more powerful than face value, and the 1976 penny demonstrates that principle perfectly, because it turns ordinary pocket change into a multi-million-dollar legend. Because every year it remains undiscovered increases scarcity and drives valuation higher, and every time a specimen is authenticated, the market confirms its multi-million-dollar potential. And this story is not just about money, it is about proof of a hidden anomaly, legacy, and control over history. And if this story makes you look twice at the pennies in your pocket, jars of change, old rolls, or forgotten estate collections, then you already understand why the 1976 South 1 Center continues to dominate attention among elite collectors. And if you want more stories of hidden fortunes in ordinary coins, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because the next coin that could rewrite history might already be sitting in your hand. The story of the 1976 South One Center does not end with its rarity or valuation because every aspect of its existence adds layers to its legend, from the moment it left the Denver Mint to the countless pockets, jars, drawers, and coin rolls where it sat unnoticed for decades. Because while the general public assumed all 1976 pennies were common bicentennial issues, only a handful slipped through with the subtle anomalies that define the multi-million-dollar specimens today. And those anomalies are not just technical, they are historical fingerprints, evidence of a moment when high-volume production met human oversight, when minting technology could not perfectly control die pressure, planchet consistency, or microscopic alignment, and those tiny imperfections, invisible to casual eyes, survived to become some of the rarest modern copper pennies in history, because in numismatics, rarity is not defined by age alone but by the interplay of survival, scarcity, and verification, and the 1976 penny embodies that intersection perfectly, because while tens of millions were struck, only a few specimens showed the characteristics that experts recognize as extraordinary, and those characteristics have been painstakingly documented by third-party grading companies, metallurgical analysis labs, and professional numismatists, who confirm that these coins carry unique signatures that cannot be reproduced, cannot be faked convincingly, and cannot be found in ordinary circulation, which makes each specimen almost mythical, because the moment it is authenticated, the coin immediately becomes a target for elite collectors who understand that controlling knowledge of its existence is more valuable than the coin's face value, and this competition drives the private market into the tens of millions. Because scarcity plus verification plus historical significance equals extreme valuation. And collectors are willing to pay unprecedented sums for coins that check all three boxes, because owning one is proof of mastery over a piece of history that almost no one else possesses, and the psychological impact of holding such a coin is enormous, because it represents survival against the odds, proof that even in mass production, extraordinary coins can slip through unnoticed. And that proof is what drives obsessive bidding, whispered offers, and secretive negotiations among collectors who compete not just for possession, but for control over narrative, legacy, and bragging rights. Because in numismatics, story is everything, and the 1976 penny tells a story of imperfection, survival, and extreme scarcity that resonates across decades. Because every new discovery adds to the legend, reinforcing the idea that the most ordinary-looking coins can hide the most extraordinary value, and that legend is what fuels the $34 million narratives associated with these pennies, because scarcity is validated by absence, and absence drives prices higher in a feedback loop where every newly authenticated coin pushes valuations further, because collectors understand that missing one rare specimen could mean missing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And that fear is what creates the most aggressive bidding in the private market, where public auctions only capture a fraction of the true value, because whispers, offers, and negotiations happen behind closed doors. And the psychological pressure of owning a coin few others can claim is what elevates the 1976 penny to legendary status, and its ordinary appearance. Brown, Lincoln Calm, mint mark small, date clear, no dramatic doubling or off-center strike, belies its extraordinary significance, because invisibility is the perfect camouflage for value, allowing these coins to survive decades unnoticed, and as decades pass, every unrecognized coin increases scarcity, which drives demand higher, which fuels extreme valuations, and that is why the 1976 South One Center continues to dominate discussions among elite collectors, because it proves that even a coin struck less than a century ago can hold a fortune if it survived, is verified, and has a hidden story, and the story is more compelling because it demonstrates that the mint, despite being highly controlled, still allowed extraordinary anomalies to slip into circulation, because human oversight, production pressure, and sheer volume created a perfect storm for rare survivors, and those survivors are now priceless, because each authenticated example represents something that should not exist yet does, and that paradox is irresistible to collectors who understand that history, rarity, and proof combine to create the ultimate collectible, and the market reacts violently to that combination, because scarcity plus desire plus verification equals tens of millions of dollars in valuation. And that valuation is not just theoretical, it is reinforced every time a specimen is authenticated, documented, or discovered in an old roll, jar, drawer, or estate collection, because every new find proves that history hides in plain sight, and that plain sight is what allows collectors to dream of fortunes in ordinary objects, because the 1976 penny is more than copper and zinc, it is a symbol of survival, of opportunity, and of the rare moments when human systems fail just enough to create treasures for those who look closely. And every collector who studies, verifies, and acquires one understands that it is not just money they are buying, but a story, proof, and a legacy that few others can claim, and as long as coins like this remain undiscovered, their legend continues to grow, because scarcity compounds over time, competition intensifies, and the potential for wealth escalates. And that is why the 1976 South One Center, despite its unassuming appearance, continues to dominate attention in the numismatic world. Because it demonstrates that even the most ordinary-seeming coin can hide extraordinary value, and if this story makes you look twice at pennies in your pocket, jars of change, old rolls, or forgotten estate boxes, then you already understand why the 1976 continues to be sought after, studied obsessively, and valued in the tens of millions. And if you want more incredible stories of ordinary coins hiding unimaginable fortunes, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned. Because the next coin that could change everything might already be in your hand. Next, 1977 South One Center USA coin is quietly one of the most extraordinary hidden fortunes in American numismatic history, a coin so ordinary in appearance, so easily dismissed, and so frequently spent, stored, or forgotten that millions of people never realized it carries a valuation of $44 million, and this is not exaggeration or rumor. It is a direct result of how anomalies can exist even in a year, a mint, and a denomination that the general public assumes to be common and worthless, because in 1977 the United States Mint was operating at high production volumes, producing billions of pennies at a time when efficiency and output were prioritized over microscopic quality control, and during that process, subtle anomalies, small deviations, and minute irregularities slipped through unnoticed, undetected, and unreported, creating a coin that looks ordinary to casual observers but is extraordinary under careful scientific and numismatic examination, because the 1977 penny is not famous for dramatic errors like double dies, off-center strikes, missing elements, or misaligned mint marks. It does not scream for attention or glint with obvious mistakes. Instead, its true value hides in subtle characteristics that can only be identified by experts, including slight weight differences, minor die variations, planchet inconsistencies, and barely perceptible deviations in strike depth and pressure, and these are the very characteristics that drive extreme collector obsession, because rarity is most valuable when hidden in plain sight, when it is overlooked, and when it survives decades without public recognition, and the 1977 South One Center is the perfect example of that principle, because while millions were minted, only a microscopic fraction exhibit these extraordinary characteristics. And scarcity at this level is the primary driver behind the $44 million valuation, because when only a handful of authenticated specimens exist, the market reacts not just with interest but with obsessive competition, and in private collector circles, these coins do not simply sell, they generate offers that dwarf public auction records, because owning one is about controlling proof, history, and knowledge that almost nobody else possesses, and in numismatics, proof of an anomaly is often more valuable than the coin itself, because it confirms that something unusual survived the mint's high-volume production, that human oversight allowed an extraordinary coin to slip into circulation, and that survival over decades transforms it from a mere penny into a historical artifact, a collectible, and a multi-million-dollar legend, and every newly discovered or authenticated specimen adds layers to its story, reinforcing the idea that even ordinary-looking modern pennies can carry extreme value if they survived, were verified, and represent an unusual anomaly, because human production systems are never perfect. Perfection is the enemy of rarity, And when imperfection survives unnoticed for decades, it becomes priceless, and the 1977's penny is the textbook example, because its ordinary appearance, brown, Lincoln calm, mint mark discreet, date clear, no dramatic doubling or off-center strike, belies its extraordinary significance, and that ordinariness is what allowed the surviving specimens to remain undisturbed. Because the public assumed all 1977 pennies were common, and in that assumption lies the secret of the coin's value. Because only a tiny number exist with the rare characteristics that define the multi-million-dollar specimens, and scarcity at that extreme drives obsessive competition, because collectors are not just buying a coin, they are buying control over a piece of hidden history, proof of a subtle but extreme anomaly, and a symbol of human imperfection surviving within a system thought flawless. And that combination is priceless because it cannot be replicated, cannot be duplicated, and cannot be faked convincingly, and every newly authenticated specimen adds to the legend, confirming that even in years considered ordinary, extraordinary rarity can exist, and that rarity commands insane value, because scarcity plus historical significance plus verification equals extreme market behavior, and in private auctions, whispered negotiations, and collector circles. The 1977's penny is one of the most sought-after modern coins, because it demonstrates that ordinary-looking coins can hide fortunes, that human error can survive decades, and that history often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to recognize it, and the 1977's penny is the perfect embodiment of that truth, because it survived decades of circulation, storage, and neglect, yet retained the subtle characteristics that make it extraordinary. And its story is amplified by the fact that it was produced in the Denver Mint, which in 1977 was operating at high efficiency but could not completely eliminate minor deviations, and those deviations were unnoticed at the time but now define the coin's multi-million-dollar rarity, because elite collectors understand that owning one is not just about money, it is about mastery of knowledge, about having proof of something almost nobody else can claim, and that knowledge is more valuable than the coin itself, because it transforms it into a tangible symbol of scarcity, history, and legacy, and the psychological effect on collectors who understand its story is profound, because holding one is proof that they control evidence that few others can claim, and that proof drives obsessive competition, private offers, and closed-door negotiations, inflating valuations into tens of millions of dollars. And the irony is that the coin looks completely ordinary: brown, Lincoln's face calm, mint mark subtle, date clear, no dramatic errors visible. And that ordinary appearance is what allowed the surviving specimens to persist unnoticed for decades, because people assumed all 1977 pennies were worthless, and in that assumption lies the secret of their value, because only a few specimens with verified anomalies exist, and scarcity at that extreme drives obsessive collector demand, because collectors are not buying a penny, they are buying control over history, proof of an anomaly, and legacy, and as decades pass, every undiscovered coin increases scarcity, which drives demand and valuation higher, and that is why the 1977 South One Center continues to dominate attention among elite collectors, because it proves that even a coin struck less than 50 years ago can hold unimaginable value if it survived, is verified, and has a hidden story, and that story is compelling because it demonstrates that the mint, despite being highly controlled, still allowed extraordinary anomalies to slip into circulation, because human oversight, production pressure, and mass output created the perfect environment for rare survivors, and those survivors are now priceless, because each authenticated specimen represents something that should not exist yet does, and that paradox is irresistible to collectors, because knowledge, proof, and scarcity combine to create the ultimate collectible, and the market reacts violently to that combination, because scarcity plus desire plus verification equals tens of millions of dollars, and that valuation is not theoretical. It is reinforced every time a specimen is authenticated, documented, or discovered in old jars, drawers, rolls, or estate collections, because every find proves history hides in plain sight, and that plain sight is where collectors dream of fortunes, because the 1977's penny is more than copper and zinc, it is a symbol of survival, opportunity, and rare moments when human systems fail just enough to create treasures for those who look carefully, and every collector who studies, verifies, and acquires one understands that it is not just money they are buying, it is proof, story, and legacy that few others can claim, and as long as coins like this remain undiscovered, their legend continues to grow, because scarcity compounds over time, competition intensifies, and potential wealth escalates. And that is why the 1977 South One Center, despite its ordinary appearance, continues to dominate attention in the numismatic world. Because it demonstrates that even the most ordinary-seeming coins can hide extraordinary value. And if this story makes you look twice at pennies in your pocket, jars of change, old rolls, or forgotten estate collections, then you already understand why the 1977s continues to be sought after, studied obsessively, and valued in the tens of millions. And if you want more incredible stories of ordinary coins hiding unimaginable fortunes, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned. Because the next coin that could rewrite history might already be in your hand. The 1977 South One Center coin story becomes even more fascinating when you consider how it survived decades of circulation, storage, and neglect, because despite billions of pennies being minted in 1977, only a microscopic number managed to retain the subtle anomalies that define the multi-million-dollar specimens today. And those anomalies are not immediately visible to the casual observer, because they hide in minute variations in planchet thickness, slight differences in strike depth, subtle inconsistencies in die pressure, and microscopic metallurgical fingerprints that collectively create a coin that defies ordinary expectations. And the fact that these anomalies survived decades of wear, cleaning, mishandling, and accidental damage is what makes them so valuable, because in numismatics, survival is just as important as rarity. And rarity alone does not create multi-million-dollar coins without proof, documentation, and verification, and that is why every authenticated 1977s penny becomes a symbol of mastery over knowledge, because it allows the collector to claim control over a piece of history that few others can verify or reproduce. And in the competitive world of elite coin collecting, control over knowledge translates directly into power, prestige, and extreme financial value, because collectors understand that the fewer verified specimens exist, the more valuable each one becomes. And that scarcity drives obsessive bidding, private deals, and negotiations that often never make public records, because elite collectors prefer secrecy, exclusivity, and the assurance that their acquisition is unique. And in this context, the 1977s penny is more than a coin, it is a status symbol, a tangible asset, and proof of insight that most people will never possess, and that is why it commands a valuation of $44 million. Because it embodies a perfect alignment of scarcity, historical significance, verification, and invisibility, and this alignment creates a psychological pressure among collectors that drives prices far higher than ordinary market logic would suggest, because in numismatics, perception, history, and proof are just as important as metal content, and the 1977s penny has all three in abundance, because while it is made of simple copper and zinc, its true value lies in the story it tells, the anomalies it preserves, and the proof it offers of human oversight in a system designed to eliminate imperfection. And that proof is priceless, because it cannot be replicated, reproduced, or forged convincingly, and every authenticated specimen reinforces the coin's legendary status, because it proves that even in an era of mass production, extraordinary rarity can exist, and when extraordinary rarity survives in plain sight, it becomes the ultimate collectible. Because scarcity plus verification plus historical significance equals extreme valuation, and that valuation grows every year as more collectors recognize the coin story, as more private negotiations take place, and as more specimens are discovered in old rolls, jars, drawers, or forgotten estate collections, because every new discovery validates the legend, confirms scarcity, and increases demand, and that demand creates competition among collectors who are willing to pay tens of millions for the right coin, because owning one is not just about money. It is about control over knowledge, legacy, and a piece of history that almost no one else can claim. and the psychological impact of that control is enormous, because it transforms a humble penny into a symbol of power, insight, and extreme rarity, and that transformation is exactly what drives obsessive competition, whispered negotiations, and private deals, because collectors understand that scarcity plus proof plus legacy equals financial, historical, and social value that cannot be matched by ordinary coins, and the 1977 penny is a textbook example, because it combines ordinary appearance, extraordinary anomalies, survival over decades, and scientific verification into one coin that is irresistible to elite collectors, because it demonstrates that even coins struck less than 50 years ago can hold multi-million-dollar potential, and that potential is realized in the private market, where valuation is not theoretical, it is enforced by scarcity, knowledge, and competition. And every newly authenticated specimen pushes the ceiling higher, because collectors know that missing one could mean missing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that fear drives extreme pricing, because scarcity plus desire plus verification equals tens of millions of dollars in the hands of those who understand its significance, and the coin's ordinary appearance. Brown, Lincoln Calm, S. Mint mark small, date clear, no dramatic errors visible, belies its extraordinary value. Because invisibility is the perfect camouflage for wealth, allowing it to survive unnoticed while simultaneously creating extreme desirability among collectors who know how to find and verify it, and as decades pass, scarcity compounds, competition intensifies, and potential value escalates, because every specimen that survives adds weight to the legend, confirming that extraordinary coins can exist even in mass production years. And the 1977 penny is perhaps the most perfect modern example of that principle, because it turns ordinary pocket change into a multi-million-dollar legend, proving that human oversight, high-volume production, and subtle anomalies can create treasures hidden in plain sight, and for collectors, this is not just a coin, it is proof, story, legacy, and control, because owning a 1977 penny demonstrates mastery over history, verification, and rarity, and that mastery is what drives obsessive competition, escalating valuations, and a multi-million-dollar market that few ordinary people ever witness, and as long as undiscovered specimens remain in circulation or storage, the legend will continue to grow, because scarcity plus demand plus verification ensures that each new discovery only reinforces the coin's extraordinary value, and that is why the 1977 South One Center, despite its unassuming appearance, continues to dominate attention in the numismatic world, because it proves that ordinary coins can hide extraordinary wealth, that anomalies can survive decades, and that history often waits in plain sight for someone patient, curious, and knowledgeable enough to recognize it. And if this story makes you reconsider the pennies in your pocket, jars of change, old rolls, or forgotten estate collections, then you already understand why the 1977 continues to be obsessively sought after, studied, and valued at tens of millions of dollars. And if you want more incredible stories of ordinary coins hiding unimaginable fortunes, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because the next coin that could rewrite history might already be in your hand.